Yours, 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Leslyn Joseph. I do not live in Elbow Park. I reside in Ward 10, and I support the Guidebook. Urban planning focuses on the physical, economic, and social impacts of the urban environment and the role of different activities within it. As we move to build a more inclusive Calgary, we must talk about the legacy of residential segregation within urban planning. Residential segregation refers to a physical separation of two or more social groups within a geographic area, such as a city. Residential racial segregation continues to exist because of specific government policies used in urban planning. A key tool is zoning. Zoning is about governmental power to shape communities through imposing and maintaining ideals upheld by certain demographics. While explicit racial zoning is illegal in many local governments, institutions instead turn to exclusionary zoning practices, making it illegal to build anything except for single-family homes, keeping out mostly people of color and lower-income families who cannot afford expensive single-family homes. In the 1970s, lower-income neighborhoods in Calgary were concentrated in the inner city and older suburban neighborhoods east of downtown. The vast majority of the neighborhoods of the inner city, whether established or new, were middle income. In 2010, we saw a distinct area where a vast number of lower-income Calgarians reside in the northeast and southeast quadrants of the city. Many of these neighborhoods have high concentrations of people of color. Former low-income inner-city communities in the 1970s have seen extensive gentrification and and condo development and have become part of a large, wealthy inner-city region surrounding the core. The Northeast and Southeast have significantly lower rates of houses being rented compared to the inner cities. Neighborhoods in Northeast and Southeast generally have more single-detached homes that are owner-occupied. The inner city is occupied by either pre-war housing or low-rise and high-rise apartments buildings that were erected in the last decade. Calgary should be modernizing land use bylaws to support the conversion of single-family lots into more affordable housing. This has the potential to eliminate disparities in wealth, housing, and opportunity. Increased affordability in housing in gentrified neighborhoods ensures that lower-income dwellers are exposed to less violent crime, are employed, have higher incomes, and greater educational opportunities. The influx of a new population of lower-income residents can also change the political landscape. This means the possibility of new leaders with creative, innovative, and sustainable ideas. This is exactly why we need to support the Great Communities Guidebook. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that perspective. Let us go now to Justine Ryder. Are you there, Ms. Ryder?
I am, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Podium's yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. As Mayor Nenshi mentioned, my name is Justine Ryder, and I would like to take this opportunity to voice my objections to the approval of the current Guidebook for Great Communities. Despite this document being in the works for 5 years, I was only made aware of it recently. I consider myself an informed and engaged citizen, so I was very surprised to learn of such significant changes being proposed without what I would consider to be proper communication to citizens. Since learning about this document, I have done my best to inform myself about its purpose and am still left confused due to the vague and difficult to understand wording in the guidebook. If the current guidebook were to be approved, it would be impossible for anyone to have any certainty about what could be built in their neighborhood. I do not believe the city has done a very good job of informing citizens of this plan, especially given the impact it will have on all areas of the city. My particular neighborhood is identified in the document as an area with the greatest opportunity for residential infill development, which is important in meeting the objectives of the municipal development plan. That's on page 47 in section 2.8. Page 48 of the document states that my community is expected to experience a greater level of residential infill redevelopment in the coming decades. This is very concerning to me. My husband and I spent over 5 years looking for a home to move our young family to. We ended up deciding on Lakeview, largely due to the R1 zoning, family-oriented community, green space, and mature trees. After working very hard to afford a significant investment, we moved in less than a year ago, so to find out that all of those things are now in jeopardy is beyond frustrating. I do not believe that my community has the appropriate infrastructure to support densification beyond where it currently is. As property owners and taxpayers, I believe we should have the ability to object or restrict increasing density in areas where it is not appropriate. We have also been planning updates to our home, but are now putting them on hold because of the uncertainty of this proposal. What do you guys say about the effectiveness of the guidebook if people are afraid to invest in their own neighborhoods? I'm hearing quite a...
I was just going to say, Ms. Ryder, I'm starting to hear a little bit of feedback. I think it's gone now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Council needs to hear and respond appropriately to all the objections voiced here today, as well as on the news and social media outlets. Such a significant change to all citizens should either be addressed in a plebiscite or as an election issue this coming fall. Surely if council members are so convinced that the guidebook will make the communities in their constituencies so great, they will have no issue doing so. If the guidebook were to pass despite such clear opposition to its current form and lack of public engagement, I would be very disappointed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ryder. Thank you for giving up your time to be here with us. Let us now go to Mr. Leather. Adam Leather, are you there, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. As I mentioned, I'm reading a piece on behalf of my wife, who's written this. Hello, my name is Heather Archibald. I'm going to speak specifically about the impact of the North Hill Plan, specifically has on me and my family. This is only one example. I know there are similar issues to mine throughout this plan. I live on Regal Crescent and share a backyard with the homes on 13th Avenue Northeast in Renfrew. I'm specifically talking about the block between Russet Road and 7th Street. If you aren't familiar with 13th Ave, it's a lovely block entirely made up of bungalows and a single 2-story home. When I look out my kitchen window, I see the kids in the house across the alley jumping on their trampoline. This is the kind of street that this is. This single isolated block has been designated for low development on the North Hill Plan. Low means up to 6 stories. This is 6 times the current height of the homes on the street. I ask you to think about a 6 specifically has on me and my family. How does that make you feel?
Hold on just a sec, Mr. Leather. I'm sorry. Someone has the webcast on, so I'm hearing you in stereo. So again, if you're not, Adam, please look at your phone and hit mute. All right, I think we're good. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. In the Great Guidebook Myth Sheet under Fact 3, it states, and I quote, "The guidebook directs multi-residential growth to where growth is already happening. I ask you, how do you approve a plan that does not honor its own fact sheet? There's no growth happening on this block. It's not a main street. It is not a primary transport network. It's not commercial. Yet they've made the jump from bungalows to recommending 6 stories. The plan designates it as 6 stories simply because it's across from a soccer field and on one end of the Renfrew pool and rink. The plan makes it sound like they're only putting apartment buildings and condos along busy streets like 16th Avenue and Edmonton Trail, but it's not. It's putting them in the middle of bungalow-lined quiet streets like 13th Avenue. I'm fully aware that this development plan does not change the zoning, but what it does do is change the way people think about the value of these homes. It changes whether they decide to invest in the upkeep and maintenance of their homes. It changes the way buyers look at homes on and adjacent to these streets. When future developers do come to City Council, it will make it easier for them to block our light, clog our alleys and streets, and destroy our privacy. The city planners are choosing winners and losers, and that's not their place. Being designated as a 6-story area will kill these streets long before any redevelopment actually happens. This is the fate that you're all deciding. The decisions that you make today have real impact. I'm not against a plan, but this plan does not have it right. These are our communities, our homes, and our lives, and you, City Council, are our representatives. I've spoken with my neighbors. There have been petitions. This is not something that we want, and it's not something that is reasonable. I'm asking each of you today to please respect our wishes and not approve this plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leather, and to Ms. Archibald, through you. Thank you for being here. Let us go now to Ms. Branagan. Are you there?
I am here.
All right. I'm going to mute myself, and you've got the floor.
Hello, Your Worship, members of Council, administration, and those on screens and speakers everywhere. My name is Kourtney Branagan. It has been a privilege to be a volunteer on the working group for the Guidebook for the past 3+ years. It could be 4. I've totally lost track. I came to be part of the committee through my role on the board of directors for the Haysboro Community Association, on which I served for close to 7 years, with the last 3 as president and member of the planning committee. I will disclose that I am a declared candidate for council in Ward 11 in the upcoming election. And I say this because over the past few weeks, I have spoken at length with a number of citizens concerned about the misinformation being spread in print and online about the guidebook. I have, as an individual, tried to dispel much of the information paid for by a select group of citizens as advertisements, as well as literature sent and presumably paid for out of Councillor Farkas's office budget. It actually never occurred to me to pool my funds with other private citizens to advocate for the guidebook. And I will say that we need to be cautious that buying and selling an opinion around city buildings should not become the norm in Calgary. I have been undeniably vocal about my support for the guidebook while providing constructive edits and feedback through committee work. As a volunteer in the committee, I'm demoralized by the fear and divisiveness that has risen in response to the guidebook in the past few weeks. I have heard comments on my social pages such as, why should those who have worked hard for their rewards to live in such and such an area share those with those who have not? Calgarians across the city work hard for what they can afford and what they want, which isn't always purchasing a detached home. This past year has been challenging for everyone. COVID has taught us that certainty is a myth. I have to wonder, after a year of being told to fear others, of thinking in worst-case scenarios, and how that is affecting our response to the guidebook, to change, when more than anything, we are craving certainty. We are needing community more than ever. We are disconnected from the very people who, when we are in connection with them, make us feel safe, loved, and valued. As we slowly emerge from the shadow of the pandemic, we have seen Calgarians lean into their neighborhoods, taking advantage of the amenities proximal to them. Pathways, green spaces, playgrounds, skating rinks. These exist in all neighborhoods, but our established neighborhoods have the most of our civic amenities. It only makes sense that people want to live near them and protect them. The guidebook provides a framework for conversations around how we support our amenities with an appropriate population, which will ensure our amenities stay in good repair, have programming, and provide a sense of community we all need. I want a Calgary that loves their community so much they want to share it with others. I want a Calgary that prioritizes putting value on homes for people, not buildings for form. I want communities that talk about neighborhood character for the relationships between people rather than the uniformity between houses. I want Calgarians to show their love of their neighborhood through robust conversations around its future as part of further planned engagement at the local area plan step. I've spent an extensive amount of time dropping literature across a variety of neighborhoods in the last 4 months. If I had to pick character from built form, I would say it's things that are personal: painted doors, garden ornaments, wreaths, door hangings, funky mailboxes, and little free libraries. More, though, character has been from the interactions, passing people on the sidewalks, and their dogs too. Or the stops and the talk as people work in their yards and garages. When I think about my neighbors, I think about their smiles and their laughter. I think about their kids who bake us cookies when we move in. Similarly, when I hear people talk about the character of their neighborhood, it is about the actions of people take to show their appreciation and their neighborliness. The guidebook puts value on quality of life through livable neighborhoods, amplifying the opportunity to create communities in which people spend more time together. The ability to provide homes across the city of a variety of scale, form, and affordability is an economic driver. As we strive for equity at a broader scale in Calgary, we need to ensure our planning strategies contribute to this. While the guidebook focuses on built form across residential, commercial, and industrial, I see a document that's about creating a city where people can live, work, and play in neighborhoods which support the best of what we have as a city: proximity to transit, libraries, pools, pathways, local businesses, schools, and restaurants. I am proud of the hours I've contributed to the guidebook. I am proud of the collaboration between industry, administration, and those from council who actively participated, and their office staff. and community members on committee to shape and reshape this document to get it to Council today. Calgarians are known for their friendliness, their adaptability, and resilience through change. We are entrepreneurs and visionaries. Let's move forward. Let's get to work planning our next chapter.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Branagan, and you're just at time. I have a note here that you have a submission as well. Is that correct, or have you already sent that in to the clerk?
I've sent a printed submission as well and have read something different.
Okay, well, we will add the printed submission to the corporate record as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, I don't see any questions for this panel, so I'll thank this panel, and we will craft the next panel here. So, do we have Tom Kent? Do we have Allan Turnbull?
Yes.
Okay, you're going to be the first one in the next panel, sir. All right. Do we have Mark McDonnell and Christine Knight? Okay. Is there anyone else whose name I called but I missed you that you would like to jump in now? Okay, I'm just going to go down my list here a little bit then. Do we have Derek Weiss? How about Brian Beck? Oh, who was that? I thought I heard someone. How about Brian Beck?
It was Derek Weiss.
Oh, Derek? All right, Derek, you're going to be number 2 on this next panel, okay? I'll tell you right now that your audio is a little bit muddy, so, pick up the speakerphone, try to get closer to the phone if you can, okay? Brian Beck. Do we have Brian? All right, I have a joint presentation with Lorna Cordeiro, Karen Paul, and Cynthia Klaassen. Do we have that group here with us?
Yes, I believe we do.
Okay.
Yes.
And are you guys, are you taking 15 minutes then, 5 minutes each?
Probably yes.
Okay, great. So you guys will be 3, 4, and 5 in this panel. And I'll stop this panel here. So this is to the bottom of panel 21 now. We'll have Allan Turnbull, Derek Weiss, Lorna Cordeiro, Karen Paul, and Cynthia Klaassen. So Mr. Turnbull, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mr.
All right.
Mayor.
The floor is yours. Thank you for being here. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Allan Turnbull, and I'm a resident of Meadowlark Park. Let me say at the outset that I'm not opposed to the concept of a guidebook in principle, but I sincerely want to have it developed through a fair, inclusive, and open process, after broad-based consultation, engagement, and debate has actually happened. I applaud the principled leadership and accountability demonstrated by City Council in April of 2020 when it decided to delay consideration of the draft guidebook for great communities. At that time, Council spoke with one voice and properly declared, and I quote, "Both Council and City administration acknowledge COVID-19 is confronting Calgarians with significant challenges and concerns. Our citizens must have the ability to focus their energy and attention on these issues and themselves at this time." City Council acknowledged almost a year ago that broad-based consultation and debate of the draft guidebook was all but impossible during a pandemic. Unfortunately for all of us, nothing has changed since that time, as evidenced by the fact that Calgary remains under a state of emergency until May 24, if not longer, due to the pandemic. Broad-based consultation is necessary to achieve public trust that is essential for the success of a major initiative that will impact the nature and character of many of our residential neighborhoods. On February 3rd, I participated in a lengthy proceeding before the Planning and Urban Development Standing Committee that went all day and well into the evening. I was disappointed to learn that the interest was so great that the phone lines were jammed and many concerned Calgarians didn't even have the chance to speak and have their voices heard. I was even more disappointed to learn of the outcome of the process decided upon late the same evening. Certainly, the timing of the committee vote and the result late that evening did not leave the appearance that the many legitimate concerns expressed were given fair consideration. While nothing has changed with regard to the pandemic's derailment of broad-based consultation, what has changed is that the pandemic has dramatically accelerated the pace of digital and technological transformation, which has dramatically shifted the way Calgarians currently work and live, and has major implications for how Calgarians will choose to work and live in the aftermath of COVID-19, trends which are already being seen in other Canadian cities. Great care should be taken now to ensure that the draft guidebook is not based on a development model calling for ever greater densification and multifamily dwellings that may already be rendered obsolete by the pandemic. Let's not rush to judgment and needlessly undermine established neighborhoods that already offer a lifestyle that Calgarians are more likely to seek out in a post-pandemic world. Accelerated transformational change is all the more reason why broad-based consultation is essential once we are freed from the pandemic's grip to better understand how people intend to work and live in the future. We cannot afford to get it wrong. To those councillors whose constituents may not be directly impacted by the guidebook, at least in the short run, the issues around the guidebook and the lack of broad-based consultation should still very much matter to you as well, because principled leadership and accountability should remain a priority for every councillor, and even more so in a pandemic. To approve the guidebook in the absence of effective broad-based consultation would be a major departure from the principled leadership and accountability standard laid down by City Council a year ago, and an unfortunate backslide, I'm sorry to say, to political expediency, which, if allowed to happen, undermines the credibility of all councillors. The issue is not what signal will you send to investors and developers if Council does not approve the guidebook today, but rather what signal you will send to Calgarians if you approve the guidebook today in the midst of a pandemic. There really is only one answer. I urge you to please choose principled leadership and accountability and defer consideration of the guidebook until effective broad-based consultation, engagement, and debate has actually taken place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Exactly 5 minutes on the dot. Thanks for that. Let us go now to Derek Weiss, please. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
All right, all yours.
Your Worship, members of Council, my name is Derek Weiss. To introduce myself, I've spent the last 30 years working in real estate project development, real estate asset management, working with both private public sector organizations. As outlined by Councillor Kourtney last week on CBC Radio, 10 years ago, the MBP was passed, and the objectives were, A, we will stop sprawling outward and balance growth, and B, we will build complete communities. To these objectives, it is clear the guidebook, A, envisions densification of established communities, and B, where new communities are proposed, these principles of complete communities are practiced. My concern are not with these key objectives, but how the guidebook envisions these objectives. There are 3 points I wish to bring to the committee's attention. 1, precision and timing to ensure success for communities. 2, the guidebook does not demonstrate alignment with Calgary's TOD, transit-oriented development strategy. And 3, at a macro level, the guidebook does not demonstrate learnings of larger cities, nor account for recent lessons of the pandemic, making it appear out of date in its thinking. Precision and timing. A broad-based policy document that opens the door for densification to over 100 neighborhoods does not necessarily serve communities effectively, but provides allowance for inconsistent change and a drawn-out development cycle that could equally weaken or destroy community fabric. As pointed out in this conversation, the city recognizes that ARP's stale date and only should be embarked when conditions for change are evident. Precision and timing means big picture. This document should express the when and why before land use steps in on how. A timed surgical approach will ensure communities are built and transformed when ready. A blanket approach will fail them. Conversely, If the objective of the Great Communities Plan, the Great Communities are preserved, transformed, or transpire to meet the broader objective of a municipal development plan, this policy would apply across the city, no exceptions. There is no relevance associated with current age, general location, existing or future communities that should influence the general application of a great neighborhood policy. So I ask Council, which is it? Is this a directional policy that applies to the city or a surgical approach to ensure the development of great neighborhoods fully transpire? 2, the TOD strategy in this plan. It is incredible that we are spending $4.5 billion on the new Green Line, and the existing TOD strategy for a rapid transit network is by and large absent in this document. Including the Green Line and not including downtown, TOD areas surrounding C-train stations represent 75 square kilometers or 8.8% of our total land area. This strategy was to provide short and long-term thinking for development and redevelopment associated with rapid train stations. I ask Council, why is the relationship of TOD not clearly articulated in this plan? If the objective is to simplify zoning and planning, TODs would be clear as day in this document, the policy would apply, and each and every suburban community TODs touch would be part of the Great Plan for Great Communities. 3, is this book out of date? It is clear from the zone mapping on page 47 that the future of Calgary is thought of as a centric city, whereby we have a downtown, an expanding urban core ready for densification, and a suburban periphery. The guidebook does not appear to take into account lessons from other cities that focused on creating a series of intensified development cores to reduce the impact of growth and stress on centralized infrastructure. Further, the unprecedented shift to a virtual workforce thanks to COVID and movement to smaller centers in the recent housing boom further exemplifies such thinking must be present. I ask Council to think about what this plan demonstrates, given it will guide us for decades to come, and ask why a continued centric relationship to downtown to densification applies. I further ask you to reflect upon your observations of other cities and personal experiences, whether this guidebook looks to our past of when and where to densify versus answering the question of where we work and how we live. In conclusion, I request those responsible for this document to reflect upon these topics presented in relationship to each other. Does the guidebook aid precision and timing? Are building blocks such as TOD reflected? And are we looking to our past for cues, or are we truly preparing the city as a whole for a future? I welcome questions and my remarks given. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And again, 5 minutes exactly on the button, which we appreciate a lot. Thanks so much for being here. Let us go to Lorna Cordeiro, please. Are you there?
I am. Thanks.
The floor is yours.
So, thank you. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. Just wondering if it's up.
We'll just make sure that that gets up before we start your timer. Give me a moment. I'm saying give me a moment, but Jordan here is doing all the work, so. His fingers are flying, don't worry.
Okay.
Okay, and we are up. Heritage Inspires Calgary. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Jordan. We're going to use that PowerPoint presentation for all three speakers. I'll speak to the first three slides.
Super.
And then my colleagues will speak to the others. Thanks. So thanks, everyone. My name is Lorna Cordeiro. I represent Calgarians for Heritage Districts, and I'm presenting with my colleagues Karen Paul and Cynthia Klaassen, who are representing the Calgary Heritage Initiative, CHI. So we're the grassroots heritage groups here to speak. Our volunteer groups advocate to preserve and promote the productive and sustainable use of buildings and areas of historic significance. We will be addressing both the Guidebook and the North Hill Communities LAP. So our groups got together as we noticed a gap in the awareness and understanding of exactly how much heritage contributes to the entire city and how planning policies should balance growth and renewal with a sense of place. So up on the screen, you see our communication campaign called Heritage Inspires YYC. We ask that when you have time, if you haven't already done so, please check out heritageinspiresyyc.org. It's a website that we launched as part of our communication campaign to inspire Calgarians to learn more about our heritage and also to get involved with planning policy if they have LAPs in their community or other community policies. We've tried to make it as simple as possible, and I should also mention any policy document on our website has been vetted with heritage planning, so a shout out to them. They spend a lot of time going through the documentation with us. Since we launched our communication campaign and Heritage Inspires YYC, it's generated thousands of views and almost 200 letters to council, so we thank everybody for that. Our organizations have a long track record of educating and involving the public on heritage matters. So not only this campaign, but when the city undertook a windshield survey of pre-1945 heritage assets over 26 communities in Zone A of the Guidebook, Calgarians for Heritage District stepped up, collaborated with Heritage Planning, and said, what can we do? So we recruited 70 volunteers and collaborated with Heritage Planning to review their windshield survey at their request, do an audit, ensure that all 4,122 heritage homes on the survey in the inner city communities had been properly identified. So in the middle of winter, our 70 volunteers went out there for hundreds of hours and looked at the inventory of homes and added to that number. So the reason I mention this is just to emphasize how enthusiastic we are about heritage. We want to see the Guidebook and LAPs work effectively with heritage tools and policies. We are in favor of compact, sustainable cities and communities that have a place for all. But we are here to advocate for a better balance between redevelopment and conservation. We are well informed of the Guidebook and the North Hill Communities LAP, but it's been a bit of a struggle to get the attention of Council despite our detailed and thorough submission to PUD last month. We have reached out to administration and we have had some engagements with them, and we do thank them for their time. But there's been virtually no movement on our asks. So we are here to distill our message to a few key asks which we would like to be included in your amendments. If you can please progress to the next slide. So the next slide should show, I'm sorry, I can't see it right now, but it should show a little bit about the economics of heritage preservation.
Yes,
all of
that's
this
what's
information. Excellent, thanks. All of this information is on heritageinspiresyyc.org, so I'll just touch on it very briefly. So there are business implications of heritage preservation. There are jobs that are created as a result of heritage preservation. There's infrastructure, economies of scale consideration. For example, the revitalization of heritage enhances the municipal tax base without requiring significant upgrades to public infrastructure. Tourism culture speaks for itself. The film industry, I can think of a number of films, including Fargo, that utilized Inglewood Main Street and its residents, as well as last year in my community of Hillhurst, Winona Earp used 10A as a setting, specifically because of the heritage homes on that street. So all bring jobs and improve the economy in our environment. You can go to the next slide, please. So I want to emphasize the environmental benefits of repurposing buildings. So this slide approaches heritage conservation from the aspect of the benefits to the environment, and explain that a little bit further. So tearing down viable buildings and replacing them with new builds designed for short lifespans, which seems to be the norm in industry these days, is just not sustainable. It adds enormously to landfill waste and carbon emissions. And I'm going to touch briefly on trees, thanks to our friends at Sustainable Calgary and Climate Hub YYC. I'm not going to try to convince you how important trees are. I think we all love them. But why do trees factor into heritage? Well, on larger lots in older neighborhoods, trees contribute to a healthier, more sustainable city for everyone. And we need a stronger policy to protect our tree canopy in order to get there. We provided a best practice utilized by the City of Vancouver in their bylaw as a means of deterring private canopy reduction. And so we have sent that to admin and council, and we're hoping it's adopted. I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who will go through a number of other asks. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorna, and your worship and members of council. Please proceed to slide 4. I'm Karen Paul with the Calgary Heritage Initiative. We support the guidebook if amended. I can't cover everything in 5 minutes, but hope you have all read our comprehensive submission that touches on these 4 areas: guidebook amendments, guidebook sustainment, the incomplete North Hill pilot LAP awaiting the application of the heritage tools and incentives, and language and communications. I'll address a few of the guidebook amendments today and welcome questions on any of the asks. Next slide, please. Thanks to William Reeder, our beautiful century-old boulevard plantings extend outdoor spaces and connectors for all, filling an essential need in densely populated areas without adding to infrastructure costs. The city closed roadways during COVID. This could be continued. Communities are defined by the patterns of streetscapes, the green space, the setbacks that support tree canopies, garage and porch orientation, roof pitch, and the human scale of development. This is neighborhood character, a term understood by the public but stricken from the guidebook. Existing ARPs will be rescinded, and what about the existing infill guidelines? The block faces of the Heritage Guideline areas will address only about 16% of the detached parcels in 20 Zone A communities. There are no infill guideline-like policies for streets with the other 2,000 assets.
Hold on,
Hello,
I seem to
I'm
have to
getting a
do
lot
this
of
every...
feedback.
Sorry, Ms. Paul, I seem to have to do this every 10 minutes or so. Look at your phone, make sure it's on mute. All right, we're good. Go ahead, Ms. Paul.
Okay, there are no infill guideline-like policies for streets with the other 2,000 assets or for the 80 communities in Zones A and B that don't qualify for the Heritage Guideline area policies. So please add patterns of streetscapes to the guidebook local area plan content policies under individual community characteristics and attributes. So that's a specific amendment. Also complete the North Hill plan by addressing view corridors and by adding policies for patterns of streetscapes, along with the application of the Heritage Area Guidelines, again, which are missing. Slide 6, please. Let's talk zones. Zone A includes Calgary's remaining heritage assets. That's only about 1% of Calgary's total housing stock. Century-old housing is in great shape. 88% only requires minor repairs or regular maintenance. It's well worth preserving and keeping out of the landfill. Zones A and B have a high percentage of housing diversity. We support hidden density in the form of laneway houses, secondary suites, and repurposing properties for multi-residential. Other forms of redevelopment accelerate heritage demolition. I'm presenting this slide because these documents lack stats to inform planning and set targets. Please amend the North Hill plan to include demographics and trends as directed by the guidebook. Include targets for densification in the LAPs. Include direction for how and where to achieve adaptive reuse of structures that contribute to sense of place and could meet evolving community needs. That includes inventoried properties. Slide 7, please. Zone A and B have many micro-communities relative to the rest of developed Calgary. Nearly 40% of the roughly 100 communities in these zones are 1 square kilometre or less, meaning that the influence of collectors, transit routes, and main streets extends deep into the neighborhood. And this means that many parcels will be eligible for higher intensities. Referring to 2.8 neighborhood local policies, please amend and support for higher intensity on collectors to read. On collectors with greater than some to be determined average weekday traffic count. So in other words, if they're heavy traffic collectors, fine, densify. But if they're not, don't. Other criteria on page 48 and 49 of the guidebook for the neighborhood local intensity levels may work well for larger communities, but should be modified where the heritage policy areas apply. Upzoning land parcels with heritage assets leads to the teardown of heritage. One way to discourage this is to limit lot coverage in heritage guideline areas. Infills covering 60% of the lot are not compatible with historic properties that have 20 to 30% lot coverage and will deter owners from designating their homes. There should be provision for contiguous areas of heritage residence and historic main streets. I understand that work on 8 is underway, but applicable policies have not yet been incorporated into the document. So please amend the wording that allows higher density near or adjacent to main streets by adding, except if the main street is a heritage main street and or where residential heritage area guidelines apply. This would protect the integrity of potential heritage districts that have both residential and commercial assets. Slide 8, please. And just to be clear, we are not only concerned with single detached residents. It just happens that the new heritage guideline area tool applies mainly to single detached residents. This on the slide is an example of a DP that was approved in October under existing policy. The lapse should include a process for flagging inventoried and designated heritage resources by adding a layer to the DMAP. Notice postings and signs, etc., should identify impacted heritage resources for all DP and land use applications. DPs for identified heritage assets should be discretionary to allow for comment and appeal at SDAB, and amend protections for properties adjacent to heritage resources to include those with evaluations in progress. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on our other apps.
Thanks. Why don't we jump straight through to Ms. Klaassen?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Nenshi and members of council. If you can just proceed to the next slide, please. I'll make sure. Looking for the slide that indicates heritage tools. I want to thank you for giving me this time to provide comments regarding the Guidebook for Great Communities as it impacts Calgary's built and net.
Sorry, Ms. Klaassen, can you just hold on? We just don't have your slide. There it is. Okay, your slide's up.
Got it?
Please go ahead, yeah.
Sweet. I thought I would just launch into things while people
it's
were
up. I just wanted to
fingers there.
It's up. I just wanted to make sure we had it, so go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me this time to provide comments on the Guidebook as it impacts Calgary's built heritage. And I just want to say thank you for including the piece on heritage in the Guidebook as well as outlines for the heritage tools. I'm a heritage advocate and past president of CHI, the Calgary Heritage Initiative, and was also co-chair of the award-winning Century Homes Project in 2012 when we had over 750 Calgary homes participating. So just clearly showing the desire to learn more about local history and for people to celebrate their heritage homes. CHI has also initiated sessions on how to designate your home, and some of our members have gone through this process and are eager to share their story and knowledge to inspire others to do the same. Heritage Inspires YYC was an initiative to engage new audiences through the website, social media, and short videos to share information on the benefits that heritage brings to our city to make it more livable, sustainable, and enjoyable. I'm here to ensure that the City of Calgary supports the continued use and adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. And this needs to be spelled out clearly in the Guidebook and be attached to actionable and funded supports and policies for heritage to be effectively embedded into local area plans. Administration has developed tools and incentives to assist with the preservation of Calgary's built heritage, which were voted on by Council last July, but because they are not yet fully funded and not due to be implemented until 2022-2023, although they appear in the Guidebook as suggestions, they aren't really currently available in the development of local area plans. I would ask that these tools be included to support the Guidebook today. To follow on the analogy provided by administration, we need to have the ingredients available today in order to make our pizza pie. We've seen the value of heritage assets bring to development, in the East Village in particular, where we've got the Simmons Building, which is now a lively gathering place along the Bow River, the St. Louis, and the King Eddie Hotel, which has become the cornerstone of Studio Bell, home of the National Music Center. We've also heard from other presenters the value that their heritage homes and buildings bring to their experience of living in Calgary. Communities and developers need the concrete how-to to support the future of heritage, and not only the should suggestions offered in the guidebook. Next slide, please. So I'm here to ask for a few things. Next steps is to make sure that the tools and incentives within the guidebook appear as they are outlined in the guidebook are available today. I would also like you to invite Chris Edwards. You've got his picture up there on the screen. He is currently the president of CHI and is a North Hill resident and would like to participate in the North Hill plan. Chris has been involved in the heritage community for over 15 years and is well-versed in the tools and incentives to help with Calgary's heritage preservation and conservation. Moreover, he owns a Century home in North Hill and has often been the eyes and ears for administration, uncovering heritage assets for addition to the city's heritage inventory. And finally, I'd like you to invite CHI to provide information to local area planning groups about the benefits of heritage and highlight existing assets in their own neighborhoods. This is further to the windshield survey that Lorna was referring to help them inspire discussion. CHI has been leading workshops on designation, as I mentioned, for a number of years, and we have seen a lot of interest in this topic in the course of this current discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here today for that. That brings us to the end of this panel. I'm not seeing any questions, so let me say thank you.
This is...
Yes?
Excuse me, Your Worship. This is Mark McDonnell. I'm sorry I was a little slow to join. My dialing fingers were not cooperating.
No problem, Mark. I'll put you at the beginning of the next. Panel. In fact, I was just about to do that. Are you here with Christine, or is it just you?
It's just me. I'll speak for Christine. She's my wife.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm sure she loves it when you say I'll speak for her.
Well, she's dealing with the kids right now.
Yeah, that's important. I'm glad you're here. So I will, in fact, start creating the next panel. So Mark, you're going to be first on the next panel. All right.
Janet now here?
Do we have? Oh, I thought I heard. Hello, is there somebody there?
Yes, Janet Weiss is now here.
Oh, hi, Janet. Okay, we'll put you as second on this next panel.
Super, thank you.
But you're very faint, so when I get to you, I'll just ask you to come a little closer to the phone.
Yes, most certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go. Do we have Brian Beck? Is Brian Beck here? All right, how about Greg Humphreys? Are you here, Greg? All right, I don't have Greg. Do I have Andrew Newsom? Madeline King?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks, Madeline. Number 2 on our people who used to be on the other side of this call so far today. Do we have Beth Riley?
Yes, you do.
Great. You're going to be number 4 in this panel. And do we have Laura Morrison?
Yes, Mayor Nenshi, I'm here.
Perfect. You'll be number 5 in this panel, Laura. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So our panel is Mark McDonnell, Janet Weiss, Madeline King, Beth Riley, and Laura Morrison. I'll ask everyone else to mute yourselves, and we will now go to Mr. McDonnell, please. After you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Hi, I'm Mark McDonnell, a resident of Renfrew. We've heard from the authors of this guidebook that increased density is needed to shore up attendance in inner-city schools and to provide growth for inner-city businesses. This guidebook seems to treat all schools as if they were the same, and all grocery stores as if they were the same, and all coffee shops as if they were the same. They aren't. In Alberta, we have public schools, Catholic schools, as well as charter schools, language immersion schools. And while a number of Renfrew families send their children to local schools because they are close, our family made a different decision. My wife and I drive our 3 school-age children to a school that's over 5 kilometers from our house every day. And we aren't alone. Ours is not the only Renfrew family that drives to that school. Langevin School in Bridgeland is quite busy because of doors to parents who work because they offer income. Perhaps if struggling schools changed their offering, they would increase enrollment. The same could be said for businesses. I'm sure we can all think of businesses that regularly have lineups out their door. This is true with or without density. When we consider people's actual preferences for schools and businesses, we see that transportation, and by that I mean transportation by car, is much more important than what this guidebook acknowledges. We in Renfrew have heard time and time again that density improves efficiency and fights climate change. I'm not particularly worried about climate change, but as a ratepayer, it's hard to see how these objectives would be achieved. Perhaps Council can explain to me how they measure efficiency. What I see is that in some neighborhoods, the city saves a little fuel on trash collection, having houses closer together, but then expends more fuel enforcing resident-only parking 7 days a week. The city increased density in the East Village and then spent $245 million on an upgraded library to service that part of town. It looks to me a simple ratepayer like increased density actually decreases efficiency, whether measured in terms of dollars or carbon released. I would like to echo the point made in the letter by the Renfrew Community Association to the City Council that Renfrew has already done enough to increase density. And I would also like to echo the point made by the Federation of Developers that communities need to be able to designate areas as being only suitable for single-family homes. And as I speak to you from my 108-year-old house, I feel its plan needs to do more to preserve heritage homes. In summary, I believe this guidebook needs to go back to the authors for more work. It cannot be accepted as is. Thank you for the time.
Thanks so much, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us today as well. Janet Weiss, are you there, Janet?
Yes, I am.
All right, you have 5 minutes, please. The podium's yours.
Thank you. My name is Janet Weiss, and I'm a resident of Meadowlark Park. During my career, I've had the privilege of living in several cities, including San Jose, Toronto, Mississauga, Winnipeg, and now Calgary. And I've lived in a variety of accommodation types, including a high-rise in downtown Toronto, low-rise apartments, several single-detached family dwellings, as well as both a condominium and infill in Calgary's inner city. Let me start by saying when you live in an apartment block or a high-rise, you're not really part of a community. You are generally concerned about your parking spot, your storage, your access to the gym, and how you can nab the common area barbecue on Saturday night. You typically don't know your neighbors, and when you see suspicious activity or simply garbage blowing down the street, you're not inclined to act because it's somehow not your job. The conversation we're having today is not about building great communities. Calgary already has many strong and remarkable inner-city communities, but rather how to preserve our sense of community while allowing for thoughtful densification to accommodate growth, lifestyle choice, and address affordability issues. I'm not against the guidebook per se, but I believe it should be done fairly and openly and honestly after comprehensive public consultation, and I believe the pandemic has stopped the city from properly completing that consultation process. So what am I concerned about? I've got many concerns, but I'm going to speak to one. 10 years ago, I chose to buy a home in Meadowlark Park. I liked the community, its mature lots and green spaces, the diversity of its residents, and its housing that ranges from very modest bungalows to a few new two-story homes. It's a vibrant community where snow angels and pandemic angels abound. For almost 2 years this summer, Meadowlark Park has lived with the instability and uncertainty caused by an inexperienced developer that refers to encouragement from the city planning department and to the draft guidebook to promote its project that aims to effectively acquire all properties in the community and convert the community into a high-density neighborhood through a piecemeal development plan with no guarantee the vision can be enforced. The community to this point has said no. Yet the developer continues to push, believing that the city will endorse and enable the plan. We have a choice right now. We can choose not to participate. In the future, under the guidebook, it would appear our voice might be muted, our choice much narrower, and our ability to sustain a vibrant community needlessly in peril. And here's what I see. The guidebook appears to contemplate a one-size-fits-all approach in which the tools of the guidebook seem more like building blocks that are to apply across similarly classified communities. And to me, this would mean the only real input community residents will have through the local area plan is not what are the building blocks that will preserve the nature and character of their community, but rather only where the mandated building blocks are to be placed. The lack of community control looks to be further undercut through a local area plan process that first lumps many distinct neighborhoods into a local area, setting the stage to lessen each community's voice and potentially pit communities against each other. And second, the process seems to tilt the balance in favor of non-elected city planners and developers who can impose their vision. The guidebook could and should be targeted and look to create vibrant neighborhoods in otherwise struggling or distressed communities. It should not be a one-size-fits-all approach across what seems to be a somewhat arbitrary zones. So let me conclude by saying when 45 communities across 9 wards ask to delay the guidebook, that's significant. And if we are all misinformed and misunderstand the guidebook, that simply underscores the need to delay consideration of the guidebook until comprehensive, effective public consultation has taken place and the guidebook has been amended appropriately. I know some councillors and planners must feel exhausted, but the fact that the book has been years in the making doesn't matter. The guidebook is not yet ready for approval. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Weiss. Thanks for being here and for spending your time with us. Let's go to Ms. King, please. Hi, Madeline.
Hello, Mayor Nenshi and members of council. My name's Madeline King. Thank you for the chance to address you today. As many of you know, I've actively supported the municipal development plan goals of densifying the established communities, and I'm fully supportive of policies like the transit-oriented development and Main Street. It will be valuable to know to what extent these existing policies are capable of getting the city to achieve the MDP goals. I have read the guidebook. Most of it is very good, but I have 3 concerns/suggestions. 1, why is it necessary for the guidebook to say that neighborhoods such as Rideau Roxborough, Elbow Park, Scarborough, and Upper Mount Royal offer the greatest opportunity for densification? That's because they're included in zones A and B in the guidebook, but it doesn't make sense. And if you were to take out those communities, it wouldn't materially affect the densification numbers. The guidebook could still be hugely successful. Personally, that statement upsets me. 40 years ago, the statement that they offer the greatest opportunity for densification. 40 years ago, I came to Calgary with little intention of staying in Canada. We moved into Roxborough, and the neighborhood turned out to be the most welcoming and supportive and community-minded community I could possibly imagine. And so we stayed there for more than 20 years and became proud Canadians. So please remove those communities from zones A and B. Number 2, there's nothing in the guidebook that acknowledges the value of single-family houses. I believe most Calgarians live in single-family houses. This guidebook will form the basis of the next land use bylaw, and at that time we'll have the same zoning for all parts of the city. Each one of you councillors know that Calgarians living in single-family homes make up the majority. They also form the majority of community association volunteers. It's by far the preferred way to bring up children and enjoy family life. However, the guidebook does not contain one positive word about single-family residential and the vital contribution they make to great communities. Councillor Gondek's proposed amendment only says they should be allowed in special circumstances. I would say that's not good enough. There needs to be an amendment clearly expressing support for single-family residential as a key part of the housing mix. If this doesn't happen, then with the way the guidebook is presently drafted, it's entirely possible the future land use bylaw will not include a separate category of single-family residential for anywhere in Calgary. Number 3, I wish to question if the focus on affordability for every community is consistent with maintaining Calgary as a head office magnet for Western Canada. What is Council's vision for the city's future? One of the guidelines stated goals for great communities is to promote housing options that are varied, inclusive, and affordable. If your vision of downtown is to continue as a magnet for successful businesses, then I would request that you delete this statement in the guidebook. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks very much, Ms. King. Nice to hear from you after a long time. Can we go to Beth Riley, please? Are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Nenshi and councillors. My name is Beth Riley, and I do live in an inner-city R1 neighborhood of Elbow Park. I've been asked by a friend to say that we're not all terrible people. I think we're not, but what is saddening me, quite truthfully, by this process is in listening and reading the newspapers and speaking with people how divisive that it has become in the past few weeks or months. And that is something that is caused by the process and the lack of trust, it seems, between relevant parties. That in and of itself is something that I think we have to do better at. I have read the guidebook, and I do believe the objectives are certainly admirable, and they provide for a framework for direction, or they should, be providing for a framework for direction and predictability. And that is a task that is one that would be supported by a responsible government. But I do look to the past a bit to inform our future and our decision makings. And when I look at historical development in Calgary, much of it has been irresponsible. There's been suburban development without limit or considerations on the impact. There's a sprawl. There are challenges with schools and transit and other infrastructure that have been largely ignored. And the cost of that development has not been borne by those that are benefiting from those developments, being the developers, in certain cases, residents. You look at Marda Loop, which is a phenomenal gem in the city, but the development, again, seems to be a bit without limit. It's just build, 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 without thought of, for example, construction, congestion on Crowchild and all the problems that flow from it. That being, it doesn't seem that the development is driven by either a thoughtful process or conversely by the communities themselves. Now, there are exceptions. You've got Garrison Woods that's created a community with a lot of density, varied housing access that seems to be available. It's created a vibrant community that's an in-demand community for many, many families. I do believe in inner-city development. And I do believe that many of the inner cities, including those of Elbow Park, do need some development, but I do think it needs to be done thoughtfully. So now I go back to the guidebook. And I don't believe there's sufficient clarity or predictability in this guidebook. I think it's got an interesting mix of very broad principles, which are admirable, and then some very prescriptive details that seem to apply to all communities, regardless of the individual characteristics of the communities. It also seems to fail to address certain infrastructure and infrastructural components, for example, schools and transit. So I look at Elbow Park, and I can say that because I live there, and we're lucky to live there. It's a vibrant community. It's engaged. There are lots of schools. You can walk to various different types of communities and businesses. But then I look at other communities that still fit within the same zone as Elbow Park, and they're not as vibrant. They may not have schools. They may have, their population has changed such that schools, the CB's chosen to shut them down. They're somewhat isolated. And when I look at those two sets of communities, I do feel that there should be some different treatment between those communities. And I'm not saying that to try and limit density, quite truthfully. I do think it's got to be done, but again, it's got to be done thoughtfully. I don't think this community guidebook achieves that individuality. I do echo Madeline King's comment that it seems that there's an inherent bias on detached housing, and I think that, in essence, is a bit of a fundamental flaw because I think a lot of people want it, and a lot of people who support the government and the communities want single detached housing. So my fear is that this guidebook and the process has led to a divisive environment that's filled with misinformation, and the conclusion is a little bit, I don't know what the city wants and whether the guidebook meets those objectives. I don't think it does, just given the process that is incumbent. And I do think that the guidebook is, again, subject to abuse, similar to the historical development problems that have arisen in the past. So that's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here with us. Let's go to Ms. Morrison, please. Are you there?
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great. You've got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Your Worship and members of Council, thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to share my perspectives and opposition to the Guidebook for Great Communities as it's currently proposed. My name is Laura Morrison. I'm a 20-year resident of the neighborhood of Briar Hill, or Hounsfield Heights, Briar Hill, and I grew up before that in Parkdale. Let me begin by stating that I'm fully in favor of increasing density within the existing boundaries of the City of Calgary, and I support the concept of slowing down or reducing urban sprawl. I'd also like to highlight that I love the idea of great communities. The community I moved into, I selected because I felt that it was great. I think it's still great 20 years later. And I don't think it needs to be fully transformed simply because it was built many years ago and it lives within a certain proximity of downtown. Certainly there's tweaks that could be made both to make it better and to increase density. At this time, I have some serious concerns with how the guidebook proposes to achieve the goals that it states. I have also felt some concern and, I guess, dismay while listening to these proceedings. From the initial presentations by staff to the questions from some councillors, I get the sense that the guidebook is somewhat of a done deal and that those of us who are speaking against it are perceived to have been coerced by groups with an agenda, don't really understand the guidebook, are scared of change, or are somehow considered rich and not wanting density in our own backyards. In the case of myself, none of those are true. I hope that councillors will consider that it is possible to be opposed to parts of the guidebook, but still wanting to be collaborative on its ultimate success and in the necessary evolution of our communities. My concerns with the guidebook relate to three main areas. One is the effectiveness of public consultation or engagement that's happened. Two is the impact of the guidebook on low-density neighborhood, what is called neighborhood local land uses, and the associated lack of opportunity for maintaining excellence within communities through the LAP process. And finally, that the guidebook creates two very distinct classes of communities in the city, those that are older and located in the inner city and those that are not. With respect to engagement, the citizens of the city have been inadequately engaged in this process in the face of a complex document which will have substantial and long-lasting impacts. I know your planners have said that there have been many engagement events, that all community associations were reached and so on, and that revisions were made. And I'm sure this is all true, but volume does not equate to quality. I have been involved in a number of engagement opportunities over the past several years related to this document, and at best I would describe it as a selective bits and bytes approach. It has not seemed effective, and that's led to frustration, not just with the document itself, but with the process. To my second point, the guidebook allows for a wide variety of housing types to be consolidated into what's called neighborhood local designations. And while the city maintains that the guidebook won't change current land use zonings, it does allow for a much more diverse style of development to happen on each and every lot within the inner city neighborhoods. I'm not going to go on and on about that because I know you've heard a great deal already, and I can't elaborate beyond what other people have already said. So I'm going to just move forward into the LAP process, which we are told is going to be a solution to a lot of the concerns related to the guidebook. However, one of my concerns with the LAP process is that we've been given a lot of building blocks that we are allowed to move around within the LAP process, but there's no acknowledgement that maybe the building blocks themselves are flawed. I see over and over and over again maps which allow us to designate neighborhood local areas versus collector areas and so forth. But at the base level, the least dense area of development is still a very wide net. Everything from traditional single-family houses up to and including very dense row houses and I'll call them low-rise walk-ups. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around because I'm trying not to repeat what other people have said.
No problem,
So
and you're coming close on time, so you got about 30 seconds.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
My final question is that if we want to increase density in the city of Calgary, in neighborhoods, why don't we have some density targets that we can actually work towards? There are many, many portions of my neighborhood that would facilitate rather substantial increases in density, but the processes that the guidebook create and the local area plan process will not allow us to actually facilitate development in those areas while protecting the traditional low-density, single-family character in the remainder of our neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you so much for being here. And I understand we do have Mr. Humphreys, so we can just hear from Mr. Humphreys before I go to the next panel. Are you here, Greg Humphreys?
Yes, good afternoon, Your Worship. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council, and the general public. My name is Greg Humphreys, and I'm a resident of Willow Park, and as many of you know, I represent the communities of Maple Ridge and Willow Park as the Community Association board member for Civic Affairs. I would like to begin today with the end of my presentation. I would like to ask that Council delay the adoption of the Great Communities Guidebook. Let it be tabled to a time after the 2021 elections. As an official response from our community, the following is the community's opinion. There are a great deal of information available with reference to the controversial guidebook of the Great Communities. The information provided does not outline clearly what the potential impact of the redevelopment based on this guidebook will mean for the city in general, Willow Park, or Maple Ridge specifically. There are very high-level references to what may be considered. However, in order for our community association to support the approval of this guidebook, we believe greater consultation is required that will lead to the potential impacts more clearly identified for the future. To be clear, our community is not against having an appropriate guidebook in place to provide a baseline for how future redevelopment may be approached in our community and Calgary in general. But at this time, we do not support the approval of the current guidebook in its current form. Now, as many of you know, I have participated and appeared before you on numerous matters dealing with the land use issues that may affect our community as well as Calgary in general. That said, as I have stated in previous hearings, the city's current planning process is not working, or at the very least, it's not working well. Historically, there have been too many side interests, exceptions, inequities in planning rulings, and questions as to where or why the playing field may be tilted. Calgary needs a citywide, all communities, unambiguous process and a clear policy that we can all rely on and all depend on. Regrettably, I'm not convinced that it is captured in this document. Let's look at the situation carefully. The terminology guidebook is in itself a misnomer. Page 4 of the book clearly states this guidebook is a statutory document. Yesterday, the law department personnel have confirmed to the mayor that this guide is in fact a statutory bylaw document. The question then is asked, why doesn't the administration just call it a bylaw? Well, the answer is probably very simple. Probably because Guidebook sells easier. In this guide document, the word should is used 223 times. While the definition is not included in the glossary, it is noted in the policy interpretation in section 4.6.I on page 117, and it reads, and it's important, policies that use the word should are to be applied in all situations unless it is clearly demonstrated for the satisfaction of the city that the policy is not reasonable, practical, or feasible in a specific situation. Proposed alternatives must be to the satisfaction of the city with regard to design and performance standards and should support the general policy intent. Now, if that's not open to its own interpretation or is ambiguous, then I don't really know what is. In my personal opinion, in its current form, this document is functionally a blank check for future changes that a relatively small group of planning personnel would just love to cash. This document and its supporters keep referring to it as being a solution. To paraphrase Councillor Woolley during the Olympics debate, there appears to be a solution in search of a problem. I'm available for any questions. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thanks so much, Mr. Humphreys. Thanks for being here, and of course for all your service to the community. I'm going to ask everyone to mute, please. We are getting a bit of feedback, and I will go to Councillor Keating, please.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. We've heard an awful lot of different comments as we've gone forward on a number of these, but Ms. King mentioned, what if we remove some of the communities that are, we've heard things like heritage or special or unique communities. Some of them were R1s in heritage situations. So the other one is that it seems like that the guidebook really isn't the large problem. It's only small parts of it that are giving us the grief. So I wonder if Ms. King can come back and expand on that statement of removing some of the communities from that statement that says they're ripe for redevelopment.
Thank you for the question, and I haven't looked at exactly what sort of amendment would be needed. It's just like you say, the vast majority of the thing, I think the guidebook is good, really good. But there is passionate opposition from a very small group, and if the real goal is to achieve the MDP, then I just can't see that whether or not these communities are included is going to make any substantial difference. I mean, I mentioned Rideau Roxborough. It's 300 homes. So really, the numbers just aren't there to make a real difference. So, yeah, I think it would be possible and it would be beneficial to the whole process.
Thank you. You listed that plus a few other communities. Do you remember which ones they were?
Yes, it's Rideau Roxborough, Elbow Park, Upper Mount Royal, and Scarborough.
Okay. Are there any other ones that you think should be?
No. I mean, there may be other ones, and I just don't know of them. Those are the ones that jumped out at me. Because, various reasons. I should say, I could say single family, they are vastly majority single family, and they also have a bit of a heritage status. But having said that, I personally love the fact that they are now including some modern architecture, because I think that's important to our vibrancy. So I don't want to just lump them under heritage.
So could you see the possibility of some sort of amendment that said Let's isolate these communities for vast and more in-depth engagement, and not move forward with them as they're stated in the guidebook, but move the guidebook forward, but sort of have some way of identifying certain communities that should be like a special study area, and then they could be looked at as for more engagement and possible changes in the future in the guidebook
that
itself.
Will be very helpful. Very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Keating. Let's go to Councillor Farkas, please.
Thanks. For Mr. Humphreys, Greg, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks for your presentation. And as you and probably Councillor DeMong before me know, you've been very active in planning issues affecting Willow Park and Maple Ridge. Could you take an example of, say, the Anderson ARP in 2017 and tell us how it might have been affected if the guidebook had been in effect at that time?
Well, the general aspects around the Anderson station, both for its TOD as well as the 2017, I think it was, Anderson ARP, would have looked significantly different if this guidebook had been in place. And I'll give you the two examples back to back. In the case of the TOD, a process which at that point had taken 9 years to get to a full agreement in relation to the TOD could easily have been shortened if there had been a guideline that was clear and concise and applicable to all areas of Calgary, so that in the case of Southwood and Willow Park, we wouldn't have felt that we were being penalized just because we were relatively close to the Anderson station. A couple of years later, with the Anderson ARP, the city wanted and put forward a very aggressive redevelopment along Bonaventure Drive, encompassing South Centre and all the way up to, I believe, 99th Avenue. And in that case, the city wanted to arbitrarily change the R1 housing to multifamily, and where the multifamily was and still is in existence across the north side of South Centre Shopping Centre, they wanted to zone it such that it would stop being two-story townhouses and was permittable up to six-story, if I remember correctly. You know, all of which is a severe detriment to the community. So, on one hand, if we had the guidebook, it would have been useful and saved a lot of time and a lot of money for the city. And on the other hand, if the guidebook had been in existence, I would have had a real tough argument to go against the plans that the city was putting forward. So, in the second case, I was very pleased that the guidebook didn't exist.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks very much. And that brings us to the end of this panel. So thanks everyone who has participated in this panel. Let's see if we can get a couple more in before we break for supper tonight. So my next panel is a joint presentation. I believe this is the Crescent Heights folks, but it's Simonetta Acteson. Are you there?
I am here.
Great. And Scott Miller?
I am here.
And Verna?
I am here.
And Guy? Guy Buchanan? That sounds like we have got 3 out of 4. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, we are, Mayor Nenshi, and this is Verna. Can I please respectfully request that I speak first?
Yes, you
if
sure
Guy
can.
comes on the line, Guy's next.
Okay.
Then Rusty, and then Simonetta. And can our time be combined?
Yes, we can do that in a 20-minute presentation. Let me see if I can add 1 or 2 more people to this panel, and then we'll begin, okay?
Thank you.
So do we have Chris and Cynthia Dawe?
Yes, Chris is here.
Okay, so I'm going to make you the fifth person on this panel, okay? So this takes us in through panel 23 and into panel 24. And then we'll continue with panel 24 after that. So, Verna, Ms. Leask, you're going to go first. So we'll put 20 minutes on the clock now, and I'll let you just pass it on to the next person, and the podium is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Nenshi, and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Verna Leask. I understand and appreciate the need for a guidebook that will assist in the planning for future growth and development within our city. We have heard that this is an important living document that will change and evolve as time goes on. What we do not know is how difficult it will be to change and amend once it becomes a statutory document, and therefore I believe it is important that we get it right the first time. The guidebook was conceived and developed pre-pandemic. In the past year, everything has changed with respect to how and where work occurs. Post-pandemic, the right to choose how and where we live will become more important than ever. As the president of Meadowlark Park Community Association and the chair of the Development Committee, I want the right to participate and to have some influence on the type and location of development that happens within my neighborhood. Individual communities and concerned residents should have the right to review building and development permits and provide their input prior to city approval. If the guidebook is approved as is, without broad-based consultation and significant amendments, city planners, file managers, and developers will have an unimpeded ability to intensify and change the character of any neighborhood with little or no say from its residents. There will be no tools or meaningful safeguards available for community planning committees and individuals to provide input, collaboration, or to object to a development that dramatically affects the enjoyment of their personal property. Development is based on the ability of developers to monetize their projects. Our home is one of, if not the largest asset we hold. We deserve the right to voice our opinions on any and all developments that may affect our property value and the nature and character of our neighborhoods. As city taxpayers, we do not deserve to have this right taken away. We have heard that the guidebook has been in the planning for the past 12 years, and numerous times over the past day and a half and longer, we have been told that we have been misled. We have been misinformed, and we are fearful of the guidebook. So, if this is true, then why rush the approval of the guidebook? Instead, why not clear up the misinformation and the ambiguity now before the guidebook becomes a statutory document? I respectfully request that the guidebook be referred back to administration for further meaningful collaborative public engagement and the amendments proposed in this public hearing to get it right the first time. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you. And now I will pass it to our next presenter.
And Your Worship, it's Guy Buchanan. I'm on the line now.
Oh, great. I'm glad you're here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Guy Buchanan, and I'm a resident of Kelvin Grove. My comments are my personal views as a ratepayer and elector. I've been involved in the land development industry for over 40 years, 21 of those years with Genstar Development Company, including Regional Vice President for Calgary. I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of planning documents and attended hundreds of community meetings and council hearings. At this hearing, council is considering approval of what will be the most impactful planning document any council has considered in decades. And prior to a month ago, the vast majority of Calgarians had not heard about it, despite claims of adequate consultation. A much smaller group, I would suggest, has heard about it, but doesn't fully appreciate the impact this statutory document if approved, will have on their single-family community. Council, I first looked at this document about 2 years ago, and because it was labeled guide, didn't pay any more attention to it. I wrongly assumed it was merely an inspirational document to be used in future planning exercises, a document of what could be. It was not until about 3 weeks ago that a resident of a community that I used to live in and where I was the community president asked me to look further into this document. I was shocked to see how deceptive this whole process has been. I truly thought that this was just a guide. It was so mislabeled. I hope not intentionally. But it is more than a guide. If Council approves this document today, it will be statutory. It will be law. The criminal code is not a guide. It is the law. The mayor has now been quoted 3 times saying that this document will not be statutory, but rather policy. Councillor Gondek's website informed readers that the guidebook is policy, not statutory. I understand that she has since removed that from her website and has since sent an apology. And yet the public notice for this hearing notes that the guidebook will be statutory if approved. Calgarians that have reviewed the guide are confused about what is being considered here today because of miscommunication, non-intentional or otherwise. When people are sworn into court, they are asked if they will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. There is a reason for that. Telling part of the truth does not tell the full story, and that is what has happened here. The guidebook and its proponents have not been telling the full story. Someone not familiar with the impact of a statutory document might believe that the guidebook will not impact them, except that once the guidebook is approved, land use districts will then be revised to bring them in alignment with the guidebook, and once a local plan has been initiated, as it has been for many communities, a builder can go into that person's neighborhood tomorrow, if this bylaw is approved today, buy 1, 2, or 3 single-family homes in a row, perhaps next door, make an application for row housing in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, and it will likely be approved by the majority of this council because it aligns with the density targets in the guidebook. That is the whole truth. And once that row housing goes in, people will stop investing in their single-family home, and the community will not attract more. I don't know what that's coming from, Your Worship.
Someone's yelling at their dog, I think. So can I just get everyone to look at their phone and please hit mute? It is National Puppy Day, after all. All right, there we go. Back to you, Mr. Buchanan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And once that row housing goes in, people will stop investing in their single-family home, and the community will not attract more single-family homeowners. Calgarians need the full story, the whole truth. My request to Council is to refer the guidebook back to City Administration for further community engagement, with expectations of amendments which address all community concerns. Please do not amend it today. Refer it back to the administration. If the proponents of the guide on Council feel that sufficient consultation has been conducted and Calgarians are on side with this bylaw, what harm is there in waiting until after the election? But let's have a full debate in the open and let Calgarians decide. My belief is that this bylaw will be the most important issue to Calgarians during this election, no matter how Council votes today. I suggest that if you do not refer this item back to administration today to allow a more fulsome discussion with Calgarians, the backlash will be tremendous. It never hurts to give a little more time for consultation where the whole truth can be provided. That is my request to Council. Thank you, Your Worship and Council.
Thanks, Mr. Buchanan. Shall we jump over to Scott Miller now?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. Good afternoon. My name is Rusty Miller. I was born in Calgary, and I care about this city. There are many positive things in the guidebook that I do support, but there are also serious concerns that need to be addressed before it should be passed. I set out my concerns and suggestions in my letter of March 8th, and I've listened with interest to the presentations yesterday and today. Based upon what I've heard and what I've read, I'm asking the Mayor and Council to refer the guidebook back to administration with a direction to undertake meaningful consultation and to publicly discuss proposed amendments. I'm asking you to do this for three principal reasons. First is consultation. I think as you have consistently heard over the last 2 days, there has not been meaningful public consultation concerning the guidebook. The second is strategic protection. The guidebook is vague, and it does not provide an urban forum for single detached homes and neighborhoods that's necessary to preserve the qualities of history, space, and urban forest that make those neighborhoods beneficial to all citizens. And finally, we have the time to do this right. There is no compelling reason to rush the guidebook through approval. You've heard that from a number of people. Now that serious concerns have been raised, we have the opportunity to conduct proper consultation in order to create a trusted and improved plan. Given my limited time, I want to highlight my concerns regarding consultation, as this is one area where I think both sides may see a benefit in compromise. The guidebook represents a monumental change. Yet, until Calgary neighborhoods recently started speaking out, the majority of Calgarians were unaware of the content and impact of the guidebook. In my neighborhood, of 200 people participating in a recent community meeting on Zoom, approximately 80% were unaware of the guidebook. The city states that it has conducted consultation, but it appears clear that the consultation has not been effective. Consultation involves an exchange of information and opinions, informing, but also listening and compromising. Yesterday, I heard numerous communities and individuals say that when the city consulted, they weren't actually listening and nothing changed. The city repeated the same generic answers with no amendment. That's not consultation. That's a failure to engage. The lack of bilateral engagement is clear. The city changed its consultation process for the guidebook, apparently to meet a specific outcome. You've now heard many times that Ms. Khan has stated, quote, "We haven't done public engagement because we want to do this differently," close quote. With respect, that's a lost opportunity, and that's demonstrated by the fact that the new approach has failed to achieve even the first goal of consultation, a requirement to inform. One of the principal issues concerning the guidebook is that it isn't just a guide, but rather it's a statutory document with the force of law. But this crucial aspect of the guidebook hasn't been clearly communicated. As Mr. Buchanan noted, even the mayor has been confused. Global News reported last week that the mayor disputed the statutory nature of the guidebook. This caused the planning department to issue a clarification stating that the guidebook is, in fact, a statutory document. I mention this not to embarrass anyone, but to demonstrate that the city's approach to consultation has not been successful. It's not surprising that many people share the same misunderstanding as the mayor. The name of the guidebook itself promotes confusion, and the document is difficult to comprehend. That's not just my observation. The CBC commented that, and I quote, "To most citizens, the 147-page document might come across like a dictionary of planning jargon," close quote. The consultation of the guidebook has been passive when it should be active. Most of the people I heard speak have stated that they like many elements of the guidebook, but they are equally clear that they need to be heard and have interaction with the city on the outstanding issues of direct importance to them. Here in a nutshell is the problem. If you don't conduct meaningful consultation, if you're not transparent, and you don't provide a fair opportunity for people to speak and to be heard, they will not accept the guidebook. You will not have the public buy-in that's needed to make it successful. When people view the process as unfair, they will not embrace the change. Rather, they will seek ways to continue to oppose or frustrate its use. Stakeholder disenfranchisement is the single largest source of public opposition. You, the council members, and the mayor have the opportunity to correct and promote bilateral consultation by referring the guidebook back to administration with a direction to engage in meaningful and serious consultation and to consider in concert with the community's proposed amendments. However, when dealing with the amendments, you should not repeat the lack of meaningful consultation surrounding the guidebook. Amendments should not be made on the fly. They need to be circulated for open public review, discussion, and potential change. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks very much. And let's go to Ms. Acteson, please.
Thank you, Mayor Nenshi and members of council. My name is Simonetta Acteson, and I'm actually here on behalf of the Crescent Heights
Community Association, and to speak more specifically to the North Hills Community's local area plan. The Crescent Heights Community Association does not support the North Hills Community's local area plan, and on behalf of our residents, we request that our community be removed from the plan until further changes and improvements can be made. Our full letter has been submitted, and our concerns are summarized in that letter. Please take the time to consider them. I need to thank our residents who submitted and have spoken to support our position. Why did we take this position? After 2.5 years of working with administration and our ward, we still feel that our concerns are not being fully considered. Are we being unreasonable? No. We have asked for thoughtful and informed alterations to the North Hill Plan and to the Guidebook. We consider our requests to be beneficial to the plans. They are not amendments that would substantially impact the purpose or direction of these plans. We do acknowledge and appreciate the incredible amount of work that has gone into these plans by City administration and recognize the many improvements that we have already seen. Is this local area plan the community-driven process described so eloquently by councillors and administration? That has not been our experience. Our community has a population density of approximately 36 people per hectare, which is considerably higher than stated city targets. 63% of our residents live in apartments, condos, duplex, or other forms of housing than single family. More than half of our residents are renters. We are a dense and diverse community already, and we see opportunity to continue to welcome more density in a sensitive way. But without demographics and targets in the North Hill Plan, how can we judge that we have achieved the goals of the plan? We believe we are already everything the Guidebook says we should be, and we can be even better. The stress of this process has been incredible. I am backed by a board of 10 individuals and a planning committee of some additional 18 people. This number of plus or minus 30 people is just a few more than the 26 people in our community that we know attended a city-led engagement session on these plans from a survey that we conducted last fall ending in December. Who can blame them? There was and still is a pandemic. We could not ask our community what they thought of the North Hill Plan prior to January 4th of this year, since the plan was being revised. After the new plan was revealed, we asked if the city would conduct a community-specific town hall with us to inform our residents. This was declined. The city says there were 3,300 engagements, but my involvement and attendance probably accounts for 300 of those engagements. This was not a cozy resident-led discussion on how density could be accommodated in our community. I wish it had been. It would have taken a lot of pressure off me and my board. Most of our suggestions and recommendations have not been considered. Many of our residents do not know about or understand these plans or how it will impact their homes. Did anyone from the city ever sit down with our community and say, you live in a 4-story apartment building. We have provided an opportunity, not just for your apartment building, but for the ones around you to now be 6 stories. Or, you live in a heritage 1 or 2-story single-family home. We are providing the opportunity for your immediate neighbor to build a 4-unit row house that will cover 60% of the lot, reduce green space and tree cover, and be 3 stories high. In addition, that neighbor can further add secondary suites. Or, you live on a street we now call Neighborhood Connector. So we therefore are giving you and your neighbors the opportunity to have a 6-story multifamily building next to you, to your 2-story infill. The city needs to have these conversations, be honest, explain what could happen and why. It may not happen, but the city is creating a plan that makes it possible. They are also creating a plan that basically removes any tools that residents can fight it with. The local area plan will inform decisions on applications. What could a resident say to oppose it? These plans offer the city a significant opportunity to do amazing things. If I could be so bold, please do the following. First, make necessary amendments to the Guidebook. There are some really good suggestions and amendments in the last couple of days, including the Alboya 2.8 amendment, the contributions on meaningful tree protection and encouraging affordable housing from Sustainable Calgary and Calgary Climate Hub, as well as recommended heritage amendments. Once that is completed and adopted, then, 2, work on the revised land use bylaw. This is where you're going to
Ms. Acteson, we just lost you. Oh, you're back.
Sorry, where did I get cut off?
On the word bylaw.
Work on the revised land use bylaw. This is where you're going to see what works and what needs more work. Maybe that is where RCG with 45% lot coverage for specified areas is detailed. Other ideas will surface. Then third, revise the North Hill local area plan to reflect these changes and additions and resident input. Please give us the opportunity to amend both these plans to make them the best they can be while still respecting and listening to the residents that live here and love this place. Aren't we all in this together? Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Let's go to Mr. Dawe now. Are you there, Mr. Dawe?
I am. Thank you, Your Worship,
Please
and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of Guidebook for Great Communities on behalf of the Active City Collective. My name is Chris Dawe, and I'm currently the co-chair of the Active City Collective with Cynthia Klaassen. We represent the collective that is a grassroots movement based on the relatively new perspective of an active economy that represents $3.3 billion in the Calgary economy. Through our research, we know that there are more than 4,000 public, private, and commercial organizations that contribute to the active economy in the Calgary region that serves more than 95% of Calgary citizens. These include sport and recreation organizations, as you might expect, but they also include 9 other segments such as health and wellness, equipment, clothing, and infrastructure. Those support Calgarians in being active throughout their daily lives. Over the past 24 months, a great deal of research and engagement of more than 23,000 Calgarians has been done by some great colleagues to create the Active City Playbook, and we are now in the process of operationalizing that plan. Through this process, we've been in a number of conversations with key stakeholders, including a number of city councillors and various members of administration, including recreation, parks, transportation, and planning, because the Active City cuts across all those areas. A number of those conversations have connected the concept of Active City to creating the critical aspect of place. We believe that the Guidebook for Great Communities is a strategic, contemporary approach to creating and updating communities and spaces, and that it supports active living and citizen well-being. We believe that it supports creating more complete communities, and these kinds of contemporary communities are often being called 15-minute cities in modern approaches around the world. By creating and updating these kinds of communities, we provide more walkable spaces with services and active spaces that are within walking distance for more citizens. We agree with the assertion in the Guidebook that these create more inclusive communities for everyone to live, play, learn, and move. In our Active City Playbook, we talk about creating communities that are people-centered and support those living in them while attracting people to want to live there. We know that the Guidebook supports this same philosophy. As such, we can collaborate in our approach to enable citizens to lead healthy, active lifestyles that drives well-being. If we create well-being, we create community prosperity. We attract and retain talent that drives the economy and economic recovery. In addition to economic prosperity, we also believe that human, social, and environmental prosperity is enhanced in these kinds of modern communities, agreeing with the Guidebook that it is inclusive and environmentally responsible. Calgary needs a strategic, consistent, collaborative approach to building and renewing communities throughout the city that support citizen well-being and community prosperity. As such, the Active City Collective endorses the Guidebook for Great Communities in doing just that, and we encourage members of council to approve the Guidebook so that the work of economic recovery and the vision of community prosperity can begin here today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dawe. I don't see any questions for this panel. You know what? I'm going to see if we can sneak in just one more person before our dinner break. The next person on my list is Nathan Hawryluk. Are you there, Nathan?
I am.
Okay. You know what? Why don't we squeeze you in here? So if you're ready, you've got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I am. Thank you. Good afternoon, evening, whatever time it is, Your Worship, Council, and members of administration. My name is Nathan Hawryluk. I was the Renfrew Community Association's planning director and the CA's rep on the North Hill plan. I'm speaking for myself today. Councillor Corral walked my letter on the floor, and I think you've all seen it. I also have some slides. I'd like
Right,
to talk
let's
about
just get
two
those.
problems.
Let's get those slides up before you get any further. We'll just pause the timer here. And yes, we do have your letter. I have to admit to you, it's in my reading pile. I haven't read it yet, but hopefully I'll get something out of your slides here. Okay, the slides are up. Go ahead.
Perfect. So Calgary has two problems. We have a productivity problem in terms of value per area, and also how redevelopment works in town. I may only have time to talk about the first. If you'd like to use the guidebook to resolve or to respond to those problems, please make it the best version possible so we can start dealing with the land use bylaw. If you don't want to use the guidebook to do that, fine, but we're still going to need to deal with those problems and revise and simplify our complicated land use bylaw. So the figures in slide 1 are from the city's 2017 infrastructure status report, which I should say is an excellent report. At that point, city assets were worth $84.7 billion. Now, if, like homeowners saving for their inevitable roof repair, the city decided to collect enough money each year to replace our assets, that would be $3.41 billion a year. Slide 2. But that ignores our water user fees, which should cover our replacement costs. So if we look at it by asset category for each business unit, and then subtract the user water fees, we'd need to collect $2.98 billion in 2017 dollars every year. Good, bad, pandemic-filled, forever. We can't have a going out of business sale and sell our streets and pipes to other towns. We must endure. Slide 3. Spreading that cost out evenly based on property value would be about $970 for every $100,000 of private property. For the average median house worth $470,000 in Calgary in January 2017, that would mean raising taxes from $1,800 to $4,500. That would increase taxes by 2.5 times, without including services that people expect from cities. If that math is correct, and I'd like to know how to improve it if it's not, those numbers should keep all of us up at night. There's only so much council can cut in a year before our great neighborhoods have decaying infrastructure. Slide 4. How did we get here? We combined low density and expensive infrastructure. Most of Calgary looks less like Langdon on the left and more like Black Diamond on the right. As Black Diamond and Turner Valley admitted a couple of years ago, the ability to tax our way out of these challenges is no longer possible. Most neighborhoods in our city are not productive enough to maintain their own infrastructure. We don't need to blame them, but we should be careful the cries of community character don't bankrupt our city. People say they want low density and expensive infrastructure, but we can't make well-informed choices because the city doesn't talk about long-term costs. It's like eating at a restaurant where tenderloin and hamburgers cost the same because the full bill doesn't arrive until after the diners leave the table. Our cities are like an intergenerational dine and dash, and someone's children will get the bill. I think we should ask people what the next increment of intensity that they would support allowing by right in their neighborhood. That's where the serious engagement should be. Is it a duplex? Is it a triplex? A fourplex? More? And then I would suggest permitting it. That's right. I'm the guy who's saying we should have a broad upzoning. And then because markets can only respond to the extent that regulators allow them. Now, restrictive covenants would still be in force, and I know that's an issue. Another step would be to make it easier to start home-occupied businesses. And we can look seriously at what relaxations council approves when consultants and lawyers apply, and ask why we keep those barriers in place that prevent residents from investing in their own neighborhoods. It's a case of libertarianism for me and authoritarianism for thee. In short, my suggestion would be that no neighborhood should have extreme change all at once, like East Village, and no neighborhood should be exempt from change. Now, some people don't like those ideas, so the guidebook is a compromise that allows residents to work together to decide where bigger levels of growth, heritage districts, and further public investment that people expect should follow private investment are most appropriate, so that Calgary can become more productive. If you don't like that compromise, you'll still need to do something about our productivity and how our land use bylaw works. I think I'm probably at 5 minutes there.
16 seconds to go.
Oh, well, I could go on for another 5, but I will say thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hawryluk. That was so intergenerational dine and dash, eh? That was really interesting. I feel like there are so many people in this public hearing who I feel like if it wasn't COVID, I'd say, come meet me at dinner and just keep talking. There's so many interesting things that are coming into my brain here. But I will go to Councillor Gondek, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two different questions for speakers. The first one is for Mr. Dawe. Is he still on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. So you talked a little bit about Active City, and you talked about how you've spoken with different departments within the city. I think when people look at Active City, they automatically assume that you're talking about sport. Can you expand a little bit about why it's more than just sport or play, the role that you see planning and the guidebook playing in executing on the goals that you have in that plan?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So the active economy that we are speaking about consists of, the way we've envisioned it, of 11 different segments. So certainly sport, recreation, even active tourism, active life are certainly part of that. But you can take a look at a number of other areas such as products and gear. So those that supply clothing and equipment for you to be active. And then certainly in the area of infrastructure. So those that design recreation facilities or park spaces. All of the components that actually create the opportunity to get active in many, many different ways. It's not just the organized active spaces. It is about what we do every single day. And so part of what we're talking about and why we're connecting into the guidebook is the notion that if we build better communities, create better pathways, better connections between communities, better opportunities for active transportation, all of those opportunities allow for people to move more throughout their day and create more well-being. And especially the way that we've seen over the last, through COVID, through the pandemic, the amount of people that are out moving and taking advantage of the spaces. If we continue to create better communities that are more walkable, we will have that continue and we will have a healthier population.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Dawe. I appreciate that. That's my only question for you. My next question is for Mr. Hawryluk, if he's still on the line.
I am.
So you have been fairly engaged in this process. I've seen you at the table when there's working groups looking at the guidebook. You've been pretty active with this. Why do you think there's an urgency to approving something like this, which changes how we look at planning?
So we have spent 12 years with this land use bylaw that essentially looked around and said, the thing that is on the ground is what should be allowed. And then 2 years later, we came up with a municipal development plan that said we're going to have half of our growth happen in the established areas. And then we've spent 12 years since with this battle in between. And the longer that we take to deal with that, the less time, it doesn't make our finances any better. The next infrastructure status report is coming out by the end of June, and it'll be fun to do that math and see if we've improved in terms of that ratio between our public investment and our private investment, to see if we've got things a little more stable. And that's why I look at it and just say, our planning system needs to be changed. We've, at some point, and detached houses are great, and I live in one, and they've been around forever. I don't think Adam and Eve built a duplex, and detached homes aren't going anywhere. But creating neighborhoods where detached houses can't become at least a duplex it's pretty top-down. It's ahistorical, and it's a radical experiment. It distorts housing prices, and typically for the least wealthy, it can prevent reinvestment and stagnate neighborhoods. And so homeowners like me, we're speculators. we're hoping to at least not lose money, and we're concerned about that. If we had time, we'd talk about interest rates and financialization of housing. But at some point, we as a society said that any change should be stopped, and we called any change a developer giveaway. And then by making any change difficult, we ensured that when inevitable changes come, they end up being highly disruptive. And it makes bigger developers have more power. And that's why I keep looking at it and say, if we just spread out a little bit of change, I mean, there's so many cities around, at least North America, that are saying we could get rid of R1 zoning. I mean, Edmonton is talking about moving from 15 residential zones to 3. And it's not just big cities. It's, I mean, High River's traditional neighborhood district is an example of it. And when cities don't manage to have a broadly affordable housing market, states and provinces are stepping in. In Ontario, they require the municipalities to have backyard suites, I think. And so so I'll admit, the Zone A, Zone B approach and the R1 motion, they concern me. And if we have to have R1, I hope we permit basement suites and backyard suites so that there can be some adaptation. Because I don't know what the future looks like. People are really bad at predicting the future, and when we lock things down, it makes it really hard to adapt in an uncertain future. I mean, we make complicated laws that benefit the biggest developers who like not having smaller development competitors. And I mean, new construction is always expensive, but limiting small-scale infill redevelopment helps large developers who build luxury houses. It's sort of in the same way that if you limited Toyota to 10,000 or 100,000 cars a year, they'd be building more Lexuses than Camrys. And even under our current land use bylaw, my basement used to be a suite at one point. If I build a backyard suite and later want to rent out my basement, I'd have to spend $2,700, $2,800 to change my zoning from RC2 to RCG, just to put a deadbolt in between my main floor and my basement. The reno would cost less than that. So if we're serious about having, or if we're complaining about how finished housing is too expensive, well, then the simplest thing we can do is to make the development process shorter, more streamlined, and more transparent. I think the Guidebook does that. And, I mean, if people don't want to use that, then we're still going to have the same problem. We just won't have the Guidebook to help us work through that process.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for my questions.
That's it for your questions, and that is perfect timing. Thank you so much to everyone who has been spending their day with us here today. We are going to take a supper break. We will be back at 7:15.